So, Budokai Tenkaichi 4 was announced a couple of weeks ago now, and it had people reacting like this. And to be honest, I was too. Budokai and Budokai Tenkaichi are without a doubt large parts of why I love anime and why I have an anime channel today. And it's been 16 years since we've gotten another iteration of this series, but after thinking about it for a while, I'm worried if the actual game will be able to live up to expectations. Before I get into why I think that though, let's take a stroll down memory lane to find out why people like myself and Afro Senju from the clip earlier were so excited for this announcement in the first place. The one thing that really stands out for me about the old Budokai and Budokai Tenkaichi games is how much flavor is in them. You can tell that at least some of the developers that worked on this game have a deep love for the Dragon Ball series. It's part of the reason why as kids we're able to get so immersed and really feel like we were controlling characters from the show. There's so many Easter eggs and detail that's just thrown in for the love of the series. Everyone knows about Tenkaichi 3's huge 161 character roster, but everything from like all of the menus having dialogue from different Dragon Ball characters, the iconic loading screens, and a full library of all the characters with quotes about them from Chi-Chi's perspective, to game modes like Sim Dragon and what if scenarios that at the time could only happen in games like these with dialogue and character interactions to fit. The games are also incredibly faithful to the actual lore of the series. If you pick a strong character like Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta, you're going to feel incredibly powerful. If you pick Hercule, you're going to feel like Hercule does, even having a little jetpack to have the same flight mechanic as everyone else. But it goes even deeper than that. Characters who use scouters interact with the lock-on mechanic differently. Androids can't be sensed just like in the anime. Some characters like Broly have super armor that's countered by similarly high power level characters. Future Trunks' Super Saiyan Grade 3 form is powerful but really feels bad because of how slow it is, just like Cell implied in the series. And I'm only really scratching the surface of how much detail is in these games, but to me it's that level of care and attention that takes these games from good to great. Never mind the nostalgia. How long has it been since we had a multiplayer Dragon Ball game where you could actually beam struggle? It had to have been like Battle of Z or Ultimate Tenkaichi, and I have my own thoughts about both of those games, but even then that would be 9 to 12 years ago. What about being able to actually transform through all of the forms progressively, or go Great Ape or Great Namek and have it actually be playable instead of like a raid event? I like the Xenoverse games, I do. I put a ton of time into the original Xenoverse when it first released, and there's clips of me on the internet fighting people like Rhymestyle and Afro Senju and those games, but I don't look back on Xenoverse as fondly as I do Budokai Tenkaichi 3. And some of that is nostalgia for sure, but also because Xenoverse was plagued with issues that I'm worried might affect Tenkaichi 4 too. First, let's talk about the logistical difficulties of the roster. This is the part that I definitely think is the least important of the issues and might seem a bit entitled, but hear me out. If you're hyped for the game, write the first number that comes to your mind for what roster size you would be happy with in the comments. Now, let's do a quick run through of what the roster might look like. I'm gonna put the characters up on the screen with the transformations I think they should have, and minor spoiler warning for some manga super arcs because I think it's safe to assume that we'll go at least a little bit ahead of where the anime last left off. I also think it's pretty safe to assume that Super will be the focal point of this game, so let's just go in order of the arcs and the most important characters in them. So Goku with these 6 forms I think makes sense. Vegeta with these 6 forms I think makes sense. Whis and Beerus from God of Destruction. At least Frieza from Resurrection F with either 2 or 3 forms depending on if they want to include the one from the manga that I'm censoring here. Hit, Kaba, Frost, Kale, Caulifla, and their fusion Kefla with honorable mentions Magetta, Champa, Vados, Botamo, and Manaka.
put that nigga in the game. Everybody be asking about this nigga. I think my son just asked about this nigga. You put him in the game, you gotta put him in the game.
Okay, maybe I'm reaching with that one, but I feel like part of what made those Tenkaichi games special was how they were just throwing characters in, and Monaka would fit right into that spirit. I mean, a pool was playable in Budokai Tenkaichi 3. Future Trunks, Vegito, Goku Black, Zamasu, and Fuse Zamasu from the Future arc make it with Xeno and Future Mai snubbed. The Tournament of Power has tons of characters you can add, but for now, let's just settle on Jiren, Topo, and Dispo, but characters like Bergamo's Trio, Ribriand, and a few other villains that got a lot of screen time will be getting snubbed. Super Broly, Gogeta, Gohan, Piccolo, the Gammas, and Cell Max from the movies are also candidates. With the antagonists out of the way, let's add androids 17 and 18, Tien, Krillin, Master Roshi, and Yamcha as supporting cast from Super, and also a lot of the original Z Warriors. From the manga chapters, characters Moro, Granola, and Gas are also candidates. And I'm not sure you can make a Dragon Ball game without adding Z at all, so let's add Goku from Z, Vegeta from Z, Nappa, Raditz, Frieza, Zarbon, Dodoria, the Ginyu Force, androids 16 and 19, Dr. Gero, Cell, Teen Gohan, Goten, Trunks, Gotenks, and all of the Boos. This is already a 56 character roster without transformations and a 108 character roster including transformations, which would be around the amount they've launched original titles like Xenoverse 1, Raging Blast 1, and Ultimate Tenkaichi with. I think that's a more fair comparison because even though Budokai Tenkaichi 4 is a sequel of Budokai Tenkaichi 3, they won't be able to transfer over any of the technology from those games because they're so old. Like, sure, they can copy ideas from those games, but they can't really copy as much of the same tech over as like they did with Budokai Tenkaichi 2 to 3 or Xenoverse 1 to 2. This also leaves out a ton of actually impactful and important characters with Z Broly, Cooler, Janemba, Dabura, Bardock, and literally any of GT, as well as a lot of the flavor from the old games missing. Hercule isn't here, the Cyberman isn't here, most of Super's supporting cast isn't here, and etc. There's also some transformations that definitely had screen time, like Future Trunks' Grade 3 that we talked about earlier, that are no longer playable. I do think there's ways you can cut down on the size of the game. After all, a lot of the roster will share moves like the Kamehameha or Full Power Energy Wave, and you might be able to do what the original Budokai games do, where instead of having 3 different Gokus, you just have one Goku and modifiable skills so you can change what transformations and moves are available to create custom movesets for players and also limit them in story mode. Either way though, Bandai Namco and the developers have some hard choices to make with the base roster unless they do go all out and put literally everybody in, which I don't think they'll do for one simple reason: money. Bandai Namco as a whole are my second worry for this game. Budokai Tenkaichi 3 released in a time before microtransactions were popular, where it was normal to get the full roster on release and not get any new characters until the next iteration of the game. Bandai Namco since then has shown, if nothing else, they are all about the money. If there's one thing you take away from this video, I 100% guarantee that at least some of the impactful characters, whether it be the Z movies, side characters, Dragon Ball Superhero, or the future manga characters, will be DLC. This is not necessarily a bad thing, at least we're getting the characters right, but it wouldn't be out of Bandai Namco's wheelhouse to cut characters from the base roster just to release them a couple weeks to a month after the game releases, or have an important character or two locked behind a pre-order bonus. Bandai also just isn't known for their quality of life or community support. Like, people were clowning Storm Connections on Twitter when Tenkaichi 4 got announced like they weren't being published by the same people. And we know that Bandai at least has some hands-on and don't just let the developers cook all the time. And if we start talking about things that would make the game better outside of Dragon Ball and outside of flavor, I have zero faith that Bandai will actually deliver here. Dragon Ball FighterZ fans are still waiting for rollback netcode when it got announced over a year ago, and honestly the game should have just been released with it. If you don't know what rollback netcode is, without a detailed explanation, it essentially just makes online play feel much better than the alternatives for fighting games when it's properly implemented. The developers of Dragon Ball FighterZ have already implemented rollback in their main title, as well as a lot of the older games that didn't have it previously, so you'd think part of the long wait is Bandai's doing. Since then, they've also published both the Demon Slayer game and the JoJo game without rollback, showing that they have no intention to implement this into any of their games. Also, other quality of life features like crossplay basically have no chance of making it. I remember back in Storm 4, I think it was Endless Battle, kind of like a King of the Hill game mode, there was no ability for the entire rest of the lobby, the other 6 players, to spectate the 2 people fighting for months after release. These aren't things that will affect you if you never want to play the game online, which I'm sure a lot of people won't, but I do think they at least are important considerations for making the game better and last longer, which, because it lasts longer, Bandai could make more DLC for the game and make more money for one, and also it would be better for the player base, and because they're making more money and because it's lasting longer, it would encourage them to either bring the series back for good or at least revive some of the other old classics. It's safe to say I have my doubts about Bandai Namco executing this the right way. I've been burned by them one too many times, especially on the more casual arena fighters they release, to just blindly be excited. But I do hope they can pull it off. It would be great to at least revive that nostalgia or be able to share those experiences with my little brother who never got to play those old gems.